Sacred Sites with Steve Ray, here on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
I need an hour this morning, so I'm glad you're giving me an extra time here for an hour. But anyway, last week we drove up to the Sea of Galilee from the airport. I'll just give you a rundown the next 4 weeks. Today we're going to do a general introduction to the Sea of Galilee. Next week I'm going to put on my running shoes and you're going to go with me for a run 33 miles around the Sea of Galilee, which I've done. And then we're going to spend a night the next week. I spent also a night out fishing with the Jewish fishermen. See, I love to get right down into these places and live them. And so we're going to go all night fishing with two Jewish fishermen. And then on the fourth week, we're going to go out on a boat ourselves on the sea with our group. And we're going to see the sea from the middle of it, all along the coastline. So anyway, we've just arrived at the hotel. It's on the shore of Galilee. But before we do anything, we have to eat dinner because everybody's tired and they want to close up the kitchen area because we get there pretty late in the evening. So we're going to have dinner first. All these wonderful new foods that people haven't eaten before, hummus and tabbouleh and all these kind of things. And they don't know where to even begin. But I tell them as soon as you get done eating, we go out to Mass. And people say, you can't have Mass after eating. You've got to have an hour fast. But when you're on a pilgrimage, you can't always be in control of your schedule. So you give a dispensation. And the priest always does that because we have to eat first here or the restaurant's going to be closed and they're not going to get dinner. And then we go out on the shore for Mass. And this is everybody's first real experience of the land. We're on the shore of Galilee. You hear the waves coming in. And we're going to have Mass. We get it set up with a table to serve as an altar. And everybody sits down. And before we start the Mass, I quickly give an introduction to what they're looking at. It's dark and all they see is lights out there. But I tell them now, over there, that's Capernaum. And over there's the Golan Heights. And over there's where Jesus spoke on the Sermon of the Mount. And everybody's just like, they're pinching themselves. They can't believe they're really there. How many times have you heard stories of the Sea of Galilee and the waves and all this? And now they're there looking at it. And I said, that section right over there on the northwest corner is where Jesus did all of his ministry. He was never where we are now or around the south. He was right there along that edge, the northwest corner. And that was the Jewish area. So anyway, they get an evening glimpse. Oh, and I say, and notice, by the way, see those two little red lights out in the middle? Those are two kerosene lanterns, and they mark the nets of the fishermen. And I'll explain all of that in 2 weeks. But I point out those are fishermen out there, and those two red kerosene lanterns mark where their end of their nets are. More on that later. So I explain all that to them. Then we have Mass on the sea, and everybody is just overwhelmed at their first Mass starting there on the Sea of Galilee. Now we get up in the morning and we have breakfast. Again, our groups do not have continental breakfasts. Our group has so much food you don't know where to begin and all kinds of things. Every kind of new food and cheese and vegetables are fresh picked the day before. Everything is fresh there, by the way. So now I take them out and we look out over the Sea of Galilee and I give a quick explanation. First of all, I'm from the Great Lakes area, Michigan. I live right near Lake Huron and Lake Erie. And I've said before on this show that Israel will fit inside of Lake Michigan 2.5 times. Square mile wise. That's how small Israel is. So the Sea of Galilee, I explained to them, is not really a sea. It's like my wife said, a wimpy pond. We would consider it in Michigan a lake. So it's 13 miles long, 8 miles wide. Some people say they remember it by 7-Eleven. I'm sure some people have heard of that store. And that's kind of roughly it, just add a little bit 7-Eleven, but it's really about 13 miles long, 8 miles wide. It's 165 feet deep, but it changes because it depends. Sometimes the water goes way down and sometimes it goes way up, depending on the rains and the snows. But it's roughly 165 feet deep and it's fresh water. People always ask me that. Is it salt water? No, it's fresh water. It's the largest freshwater reserve in that whole area of the world. And it's right in the middle of Israel. And they're very careful with that water because that's what they drink. In fact, 75% of all the water that you drink in Israel comes out of the Sea of Galilee. They have pumps, and there's a pumping station. So when you're in Jerusalem or Haifa or Tel Aviv or Beersheba, 75% of all that water comes out of the Sea of Galilee. They're now doing desalinization too. But the sea is 33 miles around. How do you remember that? Jesus lived to be 33 years old. So 33 miles around the Sea of Galilee, and it's very regulated. They have police and security to make sure that nobody messes with the sea. Now, there's a lot of different fish. In fact, there's probably roughly 20 different kinds of fish there, but the prize fish, and we're going to have it for lunch in a couple of days, is called St. Peter's fish. That's what our pilgrims call it, St. Peter's fish. But it's a tilapia, white meat. And in Hebrew, it's amnon. In Arabic, it's musht. That's the fish you want. And they always gravitate up to that northwest corner because there's 7 warm springs coming out of there, and the fish love the warm water. It's called tabga. It's shortened for heptapagon, which means 7 warm springs. So now we're in but more about that in 2 weeks. But I'm a bird watcher. So this is my wife and I hobby. I still have my books when I was 10 years old with when the birds came in the spring and when they left in the fall and all of that. And one of the birds you're going to hear, and they're not indigenous to Israel, but they are everywhere. These big green parakeets. Somebody brought one time, or a pair, and they let them loose, and now they're everywhere. And this is what they sound like. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Everywhere you're going to hear those guys. They are loud and they swoop and fly, and you're just going to hear them everywhere because they are everywhere. And there's bee eaters also. The bee eaters are interesting. They're little short guys with a little curved hook. They're fluorescent, and they fly like hummingbirds, and they pick bees off of the plants. Kingfishers, there's 3 different kinds of kingfishers, and you watch them swoop down and they pull a fish out and swim away with it. Sometimes they're better fishermen than the fishermen. Turtle doves, mourning doves, these doves and the house sparrows. By the way, they used to eat house sparrows over there. I'll explain that someday too. Pigeons, bulbuls. But now, there's 4 names of the sea. So I'm describing this. You got to remember, you're my pilgrim standing on the dock, and I'm explaining all of this to you. We've already got you the whisper sets so that you can hear, everybody can hear. And it has 4 names. So when you're reading through the New Testament, it has 4 different names. In the Old Testament, it's called Kinneret. Now, the name Kinneret, if you look at it, I sent you guys a picture. You get to cheat. I sent a picture of it. It's shaped like a harp. If you look down from above, it's shaped like David's harp. And that, in Hebrew, kinar means harp. So the Jews called it Kinneret, Kinar. But for us Christians, we call it the Sea of Galilee. That's the most famous name for it. And Galilee is mentioned 22 times in the Old Testament. And it says, in leaving Nazareth, he went down and lived at Capernaum by the sea, the land of Naphtali. So he's going down, Jesus, to live by the Sea of Galilee, because of the whole area is called Galilee. Now, there's another name called the Sea of Gennesaret, because there's a plain, a big flat area on the west side called the Plains of Gennesaret. So that's another name of it. It's also called the Sea of Tiberias, because Tiberias is the biggest city. It's a Jewish city today, beautiful city, right on the water. It's called the Sea of Tiberias, and that's another name. But if you're ever reading in the Gospels and it just says the sea or the lake in Luke, you know what it's referring to. It's referring to this. Now, are there violent storms on this lake? Yes. And I'll tell you about that down the road. But I've seen 10-foot waves on that seashore. And one time, even all the windows, when we got there, all the windows on the first floor of our hotel were smashed in, and they had visqueen put up all over the windows. And I said, what happened? He said, last night there was a storm, and it busted all the windows out on the whole first floor, washed all the tables and chairs. They had to remodel the whole first floor because of these storms. So, yes, there are storms. So believe the Gospels when it tells you things. Now, everybody, what's that out there in the middle, that red thing out there? Well, that's a buoy. And because they have to monitor the Sea of Galilee, since it's so important to them, there's gates at the southern end, and they let water in or out based on the depth. And if the water gets low, they shut those so that nothing goes out the Jordan River. And that buoy guides it. There's always a seagull sitting on top of it. It's kind of funny. But people always ask me that. That's why I'm going to tell you guys before you even ask me what it is. I always, everywhere I go, I get, hey, Steve, I got a quick question. I get that 100 times a day. And I laugh to my wife. I said, there's no such thing as a quick question. When you're in the Holy Land and somebody wants to know something, it's not a quick question because they say, what's that? Now I have to explain it's a buoy out there and why it's there and what kind of seagulls sitting on top of it and that the water levels go up and down. So I have to explain all of that. There's also, you can see during the day, recreation boats and ski-doo kind of things, but they're very limited because of they're very careful about the sea. And then night there's party boats. I don't like them, but they get out there and they have to quit by 11, but there's loud music and they dance on the boats. And you just don't expect that on the Sea of Galilee. So you've got to be prepared. There's a bunch of Jews living along the coast and they have fun. And so you got to be prepared for all that as well. So now if you're in the morning, I always tell people, get up early, go out at 5 o'clock, and you'll see the fishermen coming in their little boats. And I'll tell you more about that in the next couple of weeks because we're going to go out on boats. And all of a sudden, what was that? Well, every once in a while, an Israeli Air Force F-16 or F-35 flies over the sea, heading over Syria or Lebanon. And boy, is it ever a shock when the thing flies just about. It seems like it's 10 feet over the sea, but it's quite a shock. But it's always good to know the Air Force is there to take care of us. Well, anyway, I'm out of time. Talk to you more next week.
Sacred Sites with Steve Ray is heard live every Monday on the Guadalupe Radio Network program Morning Joy, hosted by Keith Downey. For more authentic Catholic content, go to grnonline.com/joy.